No, I mean, no, that was Bob that sent it to chairman. It should go to finance committee. If we're gonna be hiring people, I think it should probably go to the finance committee, don't you? Hey, it can go, it can. It's just something for discussion. Okay. This is the beginning of your, this is pretty good.
His hair.
Pretty good. Story with his hair. Shorter. 6 o'clock. Shorter.
We're recognizing the men from the old fire truck. Is that why they're sitting there?
Yes, sir. When we go forward, Mike's going to come right up and start talking about it. He'll bring them forward to be recognized in front of you.
We did some good pictures.
Oh, good. Yeah. They did some great work. I got to meet, I don't think I ever met Chief T.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is,
Wow.
but he was great. He was telling some good stories.
He was telling me when you got exhausted or whatever, somebody took your place.
Hands off my baby.
You just see the smoke. And then if
I did not.
they couldn't see the structure, you just and things have changed.
No kidding, right? You're probably more effective. Yeah. Hey, Landon, how you doing? Hey, buddy.
Kathy, do you remember what their troop number is?
The scouts. Very good. I had a group about this size the other day. You were in here talking about it.
Which would be record time tonight, right?
You know, it'd be nice. That would be nice. Short record time.
Right.
Not long. Yeah.
The thing that came over from fire committee didn't come over on the agenda right. Because our fire committee agenda said we were adopting 1710, and that's kind of an abbreviated version of it.
I'll talk to him again.
The 1710 addresses staffing as well as response times.
One was,
I think the motion is just that we.
Where's my guys?
I read the minutes, it said 1710 in the motion.
I think we were talking about staffing at that time.
I mean, it doesn't matter, there's 5 years to deal with it, but
Must be the witching hour. All right, everybody good? Radio's blaring. Let me call to order the town council meeting for the town of Mount Pleasant for Tuesday, March the 12th. Welcome, everybody. It sure is good to be in daylight. That's amazing. And if we play our cards right, we might get out of here while it's still daylight. That's my goal. We will begin this evening with a prayer by Chaplain Scarlett Bostic, and then the Pledge of Allegiance after the prayer will be led by the Boy Scouts of Den 11, Pack 505.
good evening, everyone. Why don't we bow our heads now and begin our council meeting with prayer. Wonderful Counselor, we come before you tonight in thanksgiving and praise. We thank you that our town has such a wonderful council and that you have allowed each one of us to come here safely. I ask that as we go into this meeting, that you, as the counselor and the guide, would open their minds, clear their minds of everything else except for their agenda, and allow them to go in tonight's discussions with an open heart, with a clear mind, and their judgments will be guided and counseled by you. We thank you also, Father, for allowing us to have so many guests here from the Boy Scouts. It's wonderful to see them. And we ask you to please allow us to go home safely this evening. We ask this in the name of all that is holy. Amen.
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Did Joe's mom feed you this time?
Item number 3 on our agenda is compliance with the Freedom of Information Act. Mr. Pagliarini, are we in compliance?
Yes, Mayor, we're in compliance.
Item number 4 is approval of the agenda. The agenda has been published. You have copies of it. Is there a motion that we approve?
So move. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor of approval signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The agenda is approved. Item 5 is public hearings, awards, and presentations.
Mayor, council members, will you please join me up front?
Mayor, members of council, good evening. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to recognize our dedicated volunteers for their incredible effort to restore the 1941 Ford fire truck. I hope each of you had the opportunity to visit the truck as you came in today. This vehicle was originally purchased in 1941 by Assistant Chief Frampton and served as a primary response apparatus until 1973. This was only the third fire apparatus ever purchased by the town of Mount Pleasant. The first apparatus, the 1880s Howe pumper, can be seen on display in the lobby of Town Hall. The restoration of the hand pumper was also a project completed by our volunteers. I would personally like to thank these men for their dedication to preserving the history of our town and our fire department. Before you today are volunteers Jay Michelle with 33 years of service, Bill Silcox with 32 years of service, Jimmy Lamb with 26 years of service, and Frankie Pettit with 19 years of service. Gentlemen, thank you all for your hard work and dedication to this restoration. This fire truck will be used for many years to come to engage the community, educate our citizens, and share our history. Thank you.
Mayor, council members, Mr. Demora, Mr. Pagliarini, department heads, and very distinguished guests. It's my honor and privilege to be here tonight to represent the dedicated gentleman behind me that has spent the past 3 years working to restore the 1941 Ford that you see parked outside. For the past 3 years, we have worked on what started out as a project to get the truck back on the road and later moved to a restoration to make it look like what it did in 1941. We were not alone in this effort, and there are many people that were involved and supported the project that we need to thank. First, Chief Herb Williams. We brought this idea to the chief. He jumped on board and supported the project. With his help with funding as well as emotional support, we were able to complete the project. He always told us, it doesn't matter how long it takes to do it, just do it right. And we owe him a great thank you for that. The town wasn't able to provide all the financial and materials that we needed for the project. There are several companies we'd like to thank individually. Lawrence McCarver. Lawrence helped us with painting the truck, was very cognizant of the amount of money that we had to spend and did a great job keeping that down. Hay Tire, who found the tires for us, and some crazy individual to mount them on split rims. If you don't know about split rims, that's pretty dangerous. Blitch Plumbing. Jay and Blitch Plumbing, you guys are amazing. Always providing us either materials or financials or other contacts in the area with businesses that they knew to help bring the project forward. Denton Shipyard, we owe a huge thanks to Lloyd Stewart Jr. and everyone in Denton Shipyard for metal fabrication, blasting, painting, as well as support from their machine shop. DeLon Robertson and Daniel Robertson from Robertson Marine, amazing sheet metal workers that took some very cryptic barroom napkin drawings and created real parts out of them. CT Lowndes, you guys are great helping us financially and had a great introduction to Mr. Paul Einauer from GlassPro, who donated all the glass that you see in the truck. And these people, it just wouldn't be possible without their support. Also, we had a gentleman who, if you're young, you don't understand this,
but he was our shell answer man for the truck. His name is Alan Groom. Alan lives in Easley, South Carolina. We made several trips to his shop, as well as my daughter stopping by his shop to pick up parts on her way back from college. We owe a huge thanks to Chief Teeter. Thank you so much, sir. You saved this truck from going to the scrap pile and brought it back to the town, and now it's where it rightly belongs. Chief Jeff Madden with Allendale Fire Department, former Mount Pleasant firefighter, worked on the truck when it first arrived, helped us with the project. And I can't thank Chief Mixon, Chief Oliveris, and Chief Simpson for their continued support. One of the blessings that came out of this was we had the fortune of meeting several of the past volunteers that ran this truck when it was frontline. We're blessed tonight to have two of them with us, Mr. Ebby Frampton, whose father actually purchased the truck, and Mr. Joe Coates. We can't thank you guys enough. Coming out to the shop, we had a great time with them telling us about the truck, but also sharing stories. And I want to harp on that for a second. We're losing the town history. Those two gentlemen and Chief Teeter are town history. And if we don't write that down somewhere, it will be gone. I thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. And last, to the hands that did the work, Jay Michelle, Bill Silcox, Frankie Pettit, I personally thank you for putting up with me. You were all good friends, and I can't thank you enough. We were all born in this town. We're all raised in this town. We all live in this town. And we'll probably all retire in this town. We're proud of this department and everything it does. We're proud of this town that we live in. That is our reward for doing this. We do it for no other reason. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell someone thank you that has put up with this almost as much as these three guys have, and that would be my wife and my two daughters, who have kindly named the truck my other girlfriend. And lastly, the one person that made all this possible, and we would not be here without it, and that's God. We're thanking him for getting our skilled hands together to do this work. So what's next? The truck has a long list of appearances in the public. It's going to go to Columbia for a week, goes to Kiowa for a weekend, it goes to Camden for a weekend, and then it'll be on display during Fire Prevention Week. So we hope to have it out in the public so everyone can see it. That's the reason we put it back together. We want kids to touch it, feel it, see what the town history is. That was our purpose. Thank you all very much. We'd like to pass out a few mementos. Abby, Fred, Joe. If y'all have time, I hope you stop and talk with these gentlemen because they can tell you a lot about this town that most of us don't know. We want to thank you, gentlemen. Mr. DeMora, come on up. You're part of this too. If you could. Thank you guys so much. What you see is actually a picture of the truck in front of its original station, which is still on Pitt Street. The picture below is the volunteers from Mount Pleasant Fire Department, and the badge in the middle is the original badge that the Mount Pleasant volunteers were given when they came on board. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Let me carry for you.
And then Chief Sherry on one side, Sherry, at the same level.
One, two, three. One, two, three.
Just missed it.
All right, Sergeant Mike Johnson. Hey, Mike. Come
up here for me. I know you like being in the spotlight. I know. Mayor, council, good evening. I have the privilege this evening to recognize Sergeant Mike Johnson for 20 years of service. Mike's a graduate of Charleston Southern University with a criminal justice degree, so born and raised right here in the Low Country. Sergeant Johnson began his law enforcement career with Mount Pleasant, March of 1999. While serving as an officer in patrol, Sergeant Johnson was proactive in his approach to patrolling his assigned area, ensuring the highest level of police services were being provided to the citizens he was assigned to serve. During his patrol service, Sergeant Johnson received numerous citizens' letters and appreciation and was recognized by his supervisors as a top performer on the team he was assigned. From 2000 to 2004, Sergeant Johnson was assigned to the Investigative Bureau as a detective. During his time in this position, Sergeant Johnson investigated every case assigned to him with the same care, professionalism, and tenacity with the end goal of getting justice for the victim. In 2004, Sergeant Johnson was promoted to the rank of Field Training Officer. As an FTO, he was responsible for the training of all new Mount Pleasant Police Department officers. He made sure they all met the high standards of our agency and prepared them to professionally serve the citizens of our community. In 2007, Sergeant Johnson was promoted to the rank of corporal and assisted the patrol team sergeant with the day-to-day supervision and guidance of the officers under their supervision. Normally, a corporal handles supervision duties under the guidance of that team sergeant or for a day or two when the sergeant was off. But in 2013, then Corporal Johnson assumed the duties as acting sergeant while his sergeant was deployed for military service. In the acting position, Sergeant Johnson excelled, and at the end of 2013 was actually promoted to his current rank of sergeant. As a patrol sergeant, he continued his high-level professionalism, leading, guiding, and mentoring the officers assigned to him. He is known as a no-nonsense but fair supervisor that expects nothing but the best from those under his supervision. Sergeant Johnson is currently assigned to the Department's Traffic Bureau and is responsible for successfully reestablishing this agency's motorcycle unit. Sergeant Johnson has recently completed the challenging motorcycle training course, and he actually rides one of our Mount Pleasant motors enforcing our traffic laws. So, Sarge, thank you for 20 years of loyal and dedicated service. Well done. Keep your hands up there. Okay, Lieutenant Jennifer Backman, come on up. Again, Mayor and Council, again have the honor and privilege to recognize one of our folks for 25 years of service. So when somebody talks about agencies not able to retain, I mean, just look at us. I mean, we got folks that have been here for quite a while serving this community. But again, it's my honor and privilege to recognize Lieutenant Jennifer Backman for 25 years of service. Lieutenant Backman began her law enforcement career at Mount Pleasant March 14, 1994, as all officers do in the patrol division. While serving in patrol for 5 years, she distinguished herself as a strong advocate for community policing, ensuring that her proactive patrol methods directly benefited those she was assigned to protect and serve. As a patrol officer, Lieutenant Backman received numerous letters of accommodations from the community, as well as praise from her peers and supervisors. In 1999, Lieutenant Backman was selected to join the Investigative Bureau as a detective. Although she would investigate any crime assigned, her area of expertise was that of family violence and child and elder abuse. She was thorough yet compassionate when dealing with these victims of violence to ensure justice was served for each of them. As expected from a person of her caliber, it did not take long for Lieutenant Backman to be promoted, and in 2002, earned the rank of corporal, serving as a supervisor in both the patrol as well as investigative bureaus. Her leadership was readily evident, and she quickly earned the respect of those she supervised. Her leadership style is one of mentoring and coaching to get the best out of each of those assigned to her. On the fast track, Lieutenant Backman was promoted to the rank of sergeant in 2004 and assigned back to Patrol Bureau to supervise patrol team. Her strong community policing efforts continued in this assignment where she always put community needs and wellness as a top priority. The same positive attitude was reflected in those that served under her. As with her previous assignment, Lieutenant Backman received numerous letters of appreciation and peer praise. From 2006 to 2011, Lieutenant Backman worked in the Office of Professional Standards and was responsible for monitoring and ensuring the professional conduct of all of our officers. She would also handle and investigate any citizen complaint that would come in and would review police applicants to ensure our high standards were met. In 2012, she was promoted to her current rank of lieutenant and serves as a precinct commander leading multiple patrol teams. Lieutenant Backman regularly reviews crime stats and trends to ensure that proper response is directed to address any issues that arise. Lieutenant Backman is an outstanding ambassador for the police department and the town with strong relationships with numerous HOAs and community groups. Lieutenant Backman holds several degrees, criminal justice, human services, and community psychology. Lieutenant, personally, thank you for your 25 years of loyal and dedicated service. Thank you. Oh, there we go. Mirror right here. You got your family picture. Yes, sir. Yes. Thank you, ma'am.
Man.
This brings us to item 6 on the agenda, which is approval of the minutes. And this will involve the minutes from the January 31st council meeting, council retreat, the February 12th council meeting, and the February 2019 financial statement. And I think because of the mass and volume involved, especially of the January 31st council retreat, we'll take that as a separate item. So is there a motion that we approve the minutes of the January 31st council retreat?
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? I have something to add. We'll have this discussion at some point, but the way we're doing minutes, and our staff is doing a very good job of doing minutes, they're doing as instructed. The problem I have is how we're instructing them to do them. Minutes are supposed to include who was there, what the topic was, what the motions were, and the outcome of the votes. And what we're doing is recording minutes, typing minutes, transposing them verbatim. And how many pages did the retreat minutes turn out to be? It was about 108 pages of minutes. And very few of those were votes. And I spoke to the staff person who did the typing, 2.5 weeks of solid staff time. So I intend to vote no on that because there's no way I can vouch that every word in that novelette, something the size of a small book, can exactly represent what people said, much less are minutes not intended to record what we think or what we say. They're intended to record what we vote on. So that having been said, those in favor of approval of the January 31st council retreat minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. So it's 8-1. Next, the February 12 town council meeting and the February 2019 financial statement. Is there a motion that we approve those two?
So moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of approval of the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. They pass 8-1. This moves us to item number 7, correspondence and public statements. Mr. DeMora.
Thank you, Mayor. We have several speakers. The first, David Shimp.
Anyone to speak, please give your name and address, and notice the clock. You have 2 minutes. You'll get a green. Do we have the lights too, or is that just the clock?
Both.
Both, okay. At yellow, you have 30 seconds.
Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Dave Shimp, 1551 Ben Sawyer Boulevard. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you again this evening about the new comprehensive plan that's currently in draft. In the last 5 years, there have been 3 major opportunities for the citizens of our town to voice their direct and unfiltered opinions regarding the direction development has taken in Mount Pleasant. There were 2 town council elections and the survey inputs as part of the comprehensive plan revision process. The voters spoke loud and clear in those 2 elections, and the citizens responded clearly to the numerous surveys. A member of the Citizen Forum went to great length to distill these survey results, and using this as a guide, I reread the draft comprehensive plan. Unfortunately, there were many variances. Just 2 examples. Limit higher residential densities and heights, 77% approval. Maintain restrictions on density and development, 83% approval. I offer these inconsistencies, of which there are many, for your consideration as you review the draft of the comprehensive plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mary Riccozzi.
Good evening, Mayor and members of Town Council. My name is Mary Riccozzi. I live at 615 Bay Tree Court. I've been avidly following the short-term rental issue. I'm awed and amazed at all the time, energy, education, and preparation that has been applied to this issue. I extend my thanks to all the members of the Planning Committee and all of Town Council for your diligence and commitment to drafting an ordinance geared towards what is best for all. I've listened and I've learned from comments both for and against short-term rentals. My hope, especially after last week's arduous Planning Committee meeting, is for an ordinance that regulates just enough to maintain the integrity of our community while allowing this industry to continue within Mount Pleasant. Thanks again to all of you.
Thank you.
Tom Kerrigan.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Tom Kerrigan. I'm from 2953 River Vista Way here in Mount Pleasant. And I'm here tonight to extend my support for emergency services here in the town of Mount Pleasant. More specifically, the minimum staffing for the fire department. I'm a retired state trooper. I know what it's like to have to respond to an emergency situation. I know what it's like when there's not enough manpower out there and you're it. No one else is available. I know what it's like to be held over because the staffing isn't there for whatever be the reason. Whether someone's sick and couldn't come in for the next shift, someone has an emergency situation at home. But our fire department, like our police department, needs a minimum staffing and a healthy minimum staffing at best. I mean, when you look at the town of Mount Pleasant, you have to say it's very professional, and you want to look at the infrastructure as well and say it's just as professional too. There's an aging population here, and I'm including myself in that. I'll be 70 here in just a couple of months. But a friend of mine was just telling me the other day that he went to change his fire smoke detector in his house. And he couldn't change it, but his wife got up on the stepladder and was more successful than he was in changing it. As she came down the stepladder, she tripped and fell. She's got a gash in her head. No one was available. He took her to the ER. I'm just saying that this is something we need and something you really should consider. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Kevin McNamara.
Hello, my name is Kevin McNamara, 2484 Darts Cove Way, and I'm a retired career fire chief who's now living in town, and I would like to talk about four-person minimum staffing. In the fire service, time is our enemy. Simply stated, saving time saves lives. In the past decade, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, a division of the U.S. Department of Commerce, did 2 landmark studies on the effect of crew size on residential and high-rise building fires. Critical tasks necessary to control the fire were performed 25% faster with four-person crews in the residential study and 12 minutes faster in the high-rise study compared to 3-person crews. The NFPA standard of 4-person staffing on apparatus is based on science and science alone. Every single piece of equipment on the apparatus in the Mount Pleasant Fire Department has a tag that states it meets NIOSH and/or NFPA standards. If we purchase the equipment that meets these standards, why do we not meet the staffing standards of the most important piece of equipment on that rig, the firefighter? 4-person staffing will also allow the Mount Pleasant Fire Department to comply with OSHA's 2-in, 2-out policy. This will allow a single apparatus to aggressively attack a fire while complying with federal regulations. The faster water is placed on the seat of the fire, the better the chance of a positive outcome for civilians and firefighters. The final concern is that currently, every single day, the Mount Pleasant Fire Department is 10 members short of the recommended number of firefighters needed to successfully fight a high-rise fire as per national standards set by NFPA 1710. 4-person staffing is the minimum national standard. I repeat, the minimum national standard. If we truly care about the safety of our citizens and firefighters, we must do everything possible to comply with NFPA 1710. This town does everything first class. First class public safety should be what we care about. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Deidre Gregg.
Hello, Deidre Gregg. I reside at 433 Benning Street, and I wanted to make some historical comments related to item A1, the rezoning of 520 King Street from public institutional to light industrial. I stand as a member of the Old Village settlement community. Unbeknownst to many, we are a settlement community of African Americans who have always been residents in the town of Mount Pleasant. We bought where we could buy between Hibbins Streets, Ferry Streets, Boundary Street, which is Simmons Street, and Wilden. And that piece of property is the heart of our community, both geographically, and it has been public institutional, not just because of the water tower, but because the historical Lang Elementary School was there for decades. My mother, along with all African American residents who reside in the Old Village, went there for elementary school. So that current zoning makes sense. Again, as we move forward with the comprehensive plan, be mindful of the precedent that you're setting. When Rivertown had a cell phone tower, it came before you several times. It had to be visually attractive and in a remote location, not in the heart of their community. So you want other settlement communities to annex. They're not planned developments. They would come in potentially as regular neighborhoods. We do need to be mindful of the historical character and the meaning of the land that's in the heart of their communities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Devin Patro. Okay, that's all I have, sir.
Is that it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was there anyone who wanted to speak who did not get to sign up? Yes, sir. Name, address, and 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hamlin O'Kelly, Buspires and Taylor, 652 Coleman. I'm here to speak about the matter that is pending before you involving Earl's Court in executive session. As you know, we were just before you on this very issue last week. I have submitted to you this week a packet. I have highlighted the relevant sections of the following: SC Code Section 629-840, the cases of Boehm versus Town of Sullivan's Island, Newton versus Board of Zoning Appeals, and Austin versus Board of Zoning Appeals. You may not like it, ladies and gentlemen, but that is the law that I have submitted to you about the standards of review for boards of zoning appeals. Should you choose to appeal the matter that was decided by your appointed Board of Zoning Appeals on the 25th, I'm afraid you've got a hard row to hoe and an uphill battle that frankly you will lose because there's an abuse of discretion standard that is applied. Two of you are attorneys who understand that matter very well and understand the standards that will be applied. As we said last week, if you choose to appeal, there's no automatic stay of the provisions that allow my client to go forward. You would be forced to seek an injunction, which would require a substantial bond, upwards of $10 million. I know that some of the matters before you tonight include funding extra firemen, funding the town in general, and this is money that could be better spent for the town's purposes. I would urge you to look at the packets that we have submitted, read the law, and make the right decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that conclude? Nope. Come on up. Name and address.
I'd like to introduce myself to the council. My name is Laurie Bixler. I'm at 144 3rd Avenue. You know, a decade has gone fast. It was about 9 years ago that I started discussions with Harry Holman, Mayor Harry Holman, regarding short-term rentals. I think Gary was around then, and maybe Mr. Bustos. So today I'm really just here to say thank you and how impressed I am by the open-mindedness and the commitment and the thought that our planning committee under our chairman, Mr. Bustos, has given so far to the topic of short-term rentals in Mount Pleasant. I am deeply grateful to people who kept an open mind, who may have changed their minds and who did their homework. And I just want to say thank you. I know that the topic is still continuing. I still am available if you want input. I want to thank Michelle, the staff member, for her incredibly hard work and all her research. And I look forward to continuing the topic and to paying a license fee and a registration fee and abiding by common sense regulations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lori. Yes, sir.
Hey guys, my name is Nathan Hammis. I'm from 1700 Whipple Road. Just backing up the minimum standard for the fire department staffing. 4 guys a truck, I think is a absolute must. I was caught in a situation where I had to give CPR to a man for 9 minutes and 10 seconds before help arrived, and I was just completely exhausted. Didn't know how to stop, wanted to help him, wanted to, his 10-year-old daughter was standing right behind me. There's no way I was gonna give up. And they got there and were able to save him, and that's a great thing, but that's scary, encroaching that amount of time, with no pulse and not breathing. And really would like to see that happen, guys. I appreciate your help on that.
Thank you, sir. All right. Oh, someone else? Name and address in 2 minutes, please.
Good evening. I'm Michelle Whitbeck. I reside at 712 Hibbins Grant Boulevard, Mount Pleasant. I would like to thank the members of the Planning Committee for their dedication and willingness to listen to the public comments and emails coming into them each month regarding the regulations on short-term rentals. As a short-term rental owner who already has a state retail license and submits accommodations tax, I appreciate this committee's decision to slow things down, analyze the definition of a short-term rental with regards to who should be required to be licensed, and make every attempt to grandfather those of us in who are legally operating. Thankfully, Mount Pleasant is in good shape right now and does not have a detrimental issue with short-term rentals. I have confidence that the Planning Committee will create a good plan that will be fair to all involved. Keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Now are we done? Anybody else? All right, we will move on with the agenda. We are on item 8, which is planning, and that means Mr. Ulma. How are you this evening, Jeff?
I'm fine, sir.
Good.
Good evening, council.
Good evening, Jeff.
Good evening.
First item under new business is an ordinance request, a rezoning, to rezone from PI2 property owned by Mount Pleasant Waterworks, about 3 acres of land at 520 King Street.
Move for denial.
We have a motion to deny. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and we have a second. The motion is to deny. Is there any discussion?
Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Olma, could you briefly give the public a reason or purpose for the zoning change that was requested?
Yes, sir. The request was from PI2 to light industrial. Part of the activity that MPW would do would be to remove the existing storage tank and replace it with concealed monopoles communications tower that would be able to host the existing 3 carriers that are on the tower. Their request to light industrial, there were a couple of options. Under existing zoning, it would have to go through the Board of Zoning Appeals for special exception use. Under light industrial, it would be reviewed administratively, still meeting the same standards. And that was, at the planning committee meeting, was the request again of MPW staff. But the committee has asked us to look at ordinance amendments, and so we would be investigating that further under the existing zoning, and the committee recommended denial at their meeting last week.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. Bustos, what was the vote of your committee?
It was 4-0 for denial.
4-0 for denial. Any other discussion before we vote? Yes, ma'am.
One quick question. So, Mr. Alma, from what we just heard from you, that means that how the ultimate project ends up, whether it ends up being that they refurbish or whatever, has nothing to do with the zoning in this case. We might, if we vote against this zoning tonight, there will still be other options to figure out that are not our decision, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, there will be still additional work left to do.
And to add to that, this also has nothing to do with their decision on the old water tower. This is only to enable another cell phone tower. All right, we prepared to vote. All in favor of the motion to deny signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Next.
Next item, 8A2, is an annexation at 1593 Boston Grill Road.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the annexation. Is there any discussion? All in favor of the motion to approve the annexation signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is approved.
First reading, ordinance number 19010, an ordinance providing for the annexation of an approximately .86 acre tract of land located at 1593 Boston Grill Road and depicted in Plat Book BQ, page 32, Charleston County, ROD.
We're now on item A3.
Next two items, Mayor, are related. First one is an annexation and then a rezoning for the same property. This is the annexation of another tract of land owned by Mount Pleasant Waterworks on Labor Camp Road. It's about an acre of land, and you see here.
Move for approval of item 3.
We have a motion to approve and a second. Is there any discussion? Second was Mr. Bustos, Bremer and Bustos. All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion to approve signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is approved unanimously.
First reading, ordinance number 19011, an ordinance providing for the annexation of an approximately .98 acre tract of land located on Labor Camp Road and depicted as Lot B1A in Plat Book L18, page 563, Charleston County, ROD.
Okay, this moves us to item A4, please.
This is the associated rezoning for the property that you just voted to approve for annexation.
Moved for approval.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? All in favor of the motion to approve signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously.
First reading, ordinance number 19012, an ordinance to zone PI2, Public Institutional 2 District, an approximately .98 acre tract of land located at Labor Camp Road and depicted in Plat Book L18, page 563, Charleston County, ROD.
A5, please.
A5 is a zoning ordinance text amendment. It would amend Chapter 156 of our Code of Ordinances. It relates to a change that was made when the use table was added to the zoning code in 2014. And previously, there were a combination of residential structures could be allowed under or above any commercial use in our commercial zoning districts. When the use table was created, it only allowed multifamily development above a commercial structure, meaning, as defined, 3 or more dwelling units, and it excluded 1 unit or 2 units above a commercial facility. Staff worked with a gentleman recently who was interested in putting his residence above his office, and under the zoning ordinance as it exists today, is unable to do that. And so staff brings forward this ordinance amendment for your consideration.
Move to approve item 5.
Second.
We have a motion and we have a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor of the motion to approve, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimous.
First reading, ordinance number 19013, an ordinance to amend Chapter 156 of the Mount Pleasant Code of Ordinances, Section 156.325C, Principal Use Table, to allow duplex dwellings, multifamily dwellings, and single-family dwellings as a conditional use in any non-residential zoning district, subject to the conditions of Section 156.326C2E as proposed to be amended, and to amend Section 156.326C2E, principal use conditions to include duplex dwellings and single-family dwellings as a conditional use, subject to the conditions enumerated therein.
Thank you, sir. A6, please.
A6 is also a zoning code text amendment. It deals with our provisions related to the conditions of trees that might be hazardous or in poor health. This too is an area where staff continues to work with individual property owners in terms of trees on their property and the effect that those trees might have on structures. And so we bring forward Planning Commission recommended approval and Planning Committee recommended approval, these text amendments, which was allow us to administer these tree protection, preservation requirements in a reasonable fashion when we're dealing with a tree that might be affecting a structure. Planning Committee, in their recommendation, suggested at the end of this language that should the zoning administrator disagree, there could be a second opinion from an arborist, as you see on the bottom, or registered engineer, and it would be as appropriate or depending on the nature of the situation that we're in.
Move to approve item 6.
Second.
We have a motion and we have a second. Again, that was Bremer Busto. All right. Is there any discussion? The motion is to approve. All right, we're prepared to vote. All in favor of the motion to approve, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Another unanimous passage tonight. We're on a roll.
First reading, ordinance number 19014, an ordinance to repeal subparagraphs 1 and 2 of paragraph A of section 156.224 of chapter 156 of the Mount Pleasant Code of Ordinances pertaining to tree conditions as the basis for providing exceptions to tree removal and replacement, and replace the same with new language addressing the same topic.
This brings us to item A7.
This is a recommendation from the Planning Committee to extend the moratorium that exists today on multifamily structures. That was adopted on March 17th, 2017, and would expire that date in 2019. Staff has a summary. Mr. Bustos may want to proceed with his comments first.
I asked for this to be on the agenda of the Planning Committee. We have a moratorium in effect, and as I drive around, it seems like our apartments are not as full as some think they are. So I thought we should extend that moratorium so that we can continue to work on our infrastructure without multifamily. Of course, that's not to say that if we do, at some point, we have a shortage in those 2 years, we can change it. But I think going forward, it would be a good idea to extend that moratorium, and I'll make a motion to approve that.
All right.
You did want to attach the pending ordinance?
Yes, because it ends this month. Thank you.
All right, so the motion is to approve item A7 with the pending ordinance doctrine. It actually came from committee, so it does not require a second. Yes, sir, discussion.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Jeff, maybe you can tell us, just so the public understands, how many multifamily dwelling units can be built now through development agreements. How many are already approved, just so that folks know it's not going to just stop because we're doing this, but it'll sure help.
There are a couple, Mr. Santos, that staff listed here. The ordinance, under the language that's in it, allows certain projects to proceed if they were vested or there was some sort of legal agreement that allows them to continue. Two of those include, and you dealt with Legacy at Patriots Point recently with a vested rights request. This would be an apartment development at Harry Hallman and Patriots Point Boulevard, and that would be able to proceed, and it's been through DRB plan review. And the Atlantic Beach House on Ben Sawyer Boulevard is subject to a legal agreement, and so that is moving through. Approval from DRB was expected yesterday, but DRB was unable to meet, so that'll get carried over into April. So there are a couple of existing multifamily projects that would proceed even with the moratorium extended.
Right, but Midtown and Carolina Park are two major ones as well, right?
Carolina Park has no further multifamily, so the project that's under construction by the roundabout near the new library is already part of Carolina Park. The other one was Liberty?
Midtown.
Midtown, they're continuing to work on some, but shifting now to other product types.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Landing.
Okay, so I'd like to add several things. First of all, I have, being the mother of two people who have used apartments fairly recently, including signing a lease a couple of months ago, one of the things that came up in Planning Committee, I'm not on the committee, but I did observe, was a question because we'd been at a ribbon cutting for Midtown recently, and recalling, Guangming, our councilwoman, was recalling the percentage of occupancy that we were told. So that company is MMR, and MMR not only runs Midtown, they also run Riverwalk and Runaway Bay, and their average occupancy is at least 91%. Now, that's just one company with 3 large properties, but another one that I just recently was the co-signer or guarantor on was Bridgeside, and that company owns several different ones. And Bridgeside is quite new, as most of us know. And that one runs between 91 and 95%, and it only opened 3 years ago. Now, like a lot of folks, I'm not crazy about seeing all these huge buildings that have gone up, especially when you drive through Midtown. Not that you need my opinion, but it is a lot of tall buildings, and it is a little overwhelming. But what I think we have to remember are two things. First of all, where are people supposed to live that are working in all our hospitality, that are working in all our starter jobs, even career positions? My son was recently hired. He couldn't buy a home, couldn't possibly. Where are they supposed to live if we want them to be on this side of the bridge? One of the things we want to do is try to keep more people on the side of the bridge where they work so they don't have to keep going back and forth. We already know it's very expensive to buy a house. The second thing I think we need to keep in mind is we just passed a permit allocation, and it was a unanimous vote. And part of that was 100 units a year for multifamily housing, and as part of that allocation. And the ones that have already been mentioned have already been permitted, so they don't have anything to do with the allocation, nor would they have to do with this moratorium. So what we're saying is those projects happen to both be on this side of town. What if somewhere up in the north end of town there's a property that could put in 50 units or 100 units or something? They would essentially not be able to do that for the next few years. And maybe, who knows, we might have a business that's coming up there or an industry. Plus, there's a legal side to this. In 1999, Town Council passed an ordinance here in Mount Pleasant regarding its authority to use moratoriums. And one of the things it said is what to consider before issuing. It says, a moratorium is, from one perspective, the most extreme land use action that a municipality can take because it suspends completely the rights of owners to use that property. Seen in this slide, is advisable to precede the adoption of a moratorium by findings that confirm the necessity. What are the conditions that mandate the imposition of a moratorium? Well, you could say we have a lot of traffic. We're trying to have the infrastructure catch up. Again, only 100 units are even going to be allowed to be permitted per year under our new program. We've already taken care of. That's called belts and suspenders. I don't know if you know that term, but if you've already taken care of something, in this case a belt, we've created the permit allocation, why do we need suspenders too? In fact, it actually could invite, if there was someone out there that wanted to do it, it could even invite legal action, which there's no reason for it. Are no other alternatives less burdensome on property rights available? Why are the existing land use plans and ordinances not adequate? What recent circumstances have occurred that justify the adoption of the moratorium? How serious and urgent are these circumstances? And what hard evidence is there to document the necessity of the moratorium? The bottom line is, it's not that I'm against limiting or slowing more apartments. I realize a lot of people don't feel we need any more, but I think we need to, one, know those numbers, because if we have 91 to 95% occupancy in all of our apartments, and I don't know what it is in every apartment, we should get that information before we make this decision, because that means that people need them as a way to live in Mount Pleasant until they can afford a home. And the second thing is, again, we are doubling up here. I'm not quite sure why we need to do that. So sometimes you make a rule because you really need it. Sometimes maybe it's because it sends some sort of political message, and I'm not sure that we need to be in the business of the latter.
Thank you. Yes, sir, Mr. Bustos.
And just so everyone knows, there are exemptions to this for senior housing and affordable housing if someone will build them. And Carolina Park is exempt from anything because they have a development agreement. Also, that's why this is an extension of the moratorium, not a new moratorium. So all the research that was done was for the first moratorium. So all those things were done, and it hasn't gotten any better. They're still building apartments to work through this. And I will say, from the last moratorium, just like this one, we need to let all those buildings work through so that we can find out what we have. And that's what's been, we don't know if we're reaching a tipping point, because no developer, no person renting an apartment is going to say, I have 40% occupancy. Why would they do that? They're going to all say, I have 90% occupancy, everything's wonderful. But we do have infrastructure that is lacking. All we have to do is look at Coleman Boulevard, with the boulevard dumping out on traffic onto it, King Street with a lot of traffic. So this is an extension of the moratorium that is in place. It's not a new one. It's an extension of that.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Whitley.
Jeff, I would just like to ask to confirm that affordable housing is exempted as well, or is it just senior housing?
Just senior housing as currently listed.
So I think
The affordable housing provision is in the building permit allocation. It could be senior and affordable, but affordable is covered in the building permit allocation ordinance, not in the moratorium.
I think that we need to update that ordinance to include affordable housing. That would make me more comfortable.
Mr. Paglarini, if we wanted to do that, would there be a need to do that tonight, or can we do it at second reading, or?
It's required to be done at second reading.
At second reading. So first reading, it has to, and the motion is as written tonight. So if we want to change it, we can change it at second reading. Yes, sir, Mr. Kane.
I think we also should add in the workforce housing for our own employees that we discuss all the time. And some builders, I think on the building permit allocation program, were telling us how, well, we're not going to be able to build for first responders if you pass this. And here we are, I guess, close to 60 or 90 days later, and I haven't seen anybody flying into town to build those. But I think it should be exempted as well. And again, we could do that at second reading. Just to create the opportunity, and I'm not overly optimistic they're going to jump at it, but let's try and make it as amenable as possible to getting the people that serve the town to live close to where they're needed in an emergency. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Lanning.
I have one more comment to make, and that is, having gone through the process just recently of helping my son search for a place, a lot of people don't realize that even the least expensive apartments in our community cost in the $1,200 to $1,250 a month range, and a lot of them are in the $1,500 or more a month range, which means someone just getting out of high school, getting their first job, or graduating from college, getting their first job, is really going to struggle. And one of the things that happens when you don't have 91 to 95% occupancy, and again, we don't know the number. I keep saying that's the problem. To me, we just need to get more information before we make this decision. But if you don't have quite such high occupancy, there's a little more competition for price. So again, from an affordability viewpoint, having a little bit more supply. Now, one other thing. There's a lot of thought in this community that we have an imbalance of apartments and multifamily dwelling. And the reality is, I saw something, Mr. Alma, do we have that? It's, I'm not asking you to pull it up now, but I think there's something, and it's a national average is like 27% multifamily versus single family. And I think we're right at that. Isn't that
I'm
correct?
not sure what the national average is, but we do track and monitor our own split between multifamily and single family, and I think it was somewhere in that 25% multifamily in the last report that we did.
The point being that we don't have an inordinate amount of multifamily dwellings. So again, I'm not standing here being an advocate for multifamily dwellings. I just feel like we've already dealt with this with the permits. So I just want to make sure people, because I am going to vote against this, but it's not because I want to see tons of more apartments come up. It's because I just think we're going a little bit overboard on it.
Mr. Mayor, one clarification on one of the comments from Ms. Landing is, while projects may have been exempt from the existing moratorium, they're not exempt from our building permit allocation system. So for instance, the two I just showed you, which actually equal 400 dwelling units, would be 400 of the 500 available for the next 5-year period. So they are exempt under one ordinance, but they were not exempted under the permit allocation system.
Thank you.
If that's helpful.
And I just asked Mr. Demora, I think the last number came in, we're 73% single-family, 27% multifamily, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks. Yes, sir, Mr. Owens.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Olma, has there been any inquiries as far as developers go coming in seeking to build multifamily? Has your office received calls and questions about either the moratorium or their interest in building multifamily?
Yes, sir. We occasionally have folks that will visit or call. Ms. Farrell and I were on a phone call with a group, for instance, a couple of months ago that was representing a multifamily developer out of another state. And when we described some of the requirements and things that we had, they indicated that they would wait rather than pursue anything. But there are occasional inquiries about apartment multifamily development, yes.
Okay. And secondly, the property on Ben Sawyer was a result of a mediation agreement, correct?
Yes.
And that was item 2 in the ordinance?
Correct. That was an exemption.
Right.
If that's what you're referring to?
I am.
That was one, either it was subject to an agreement or had vested rights. Those were exempt.
I think it was both, wasn't it? It was
That one might have been both.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, just for clarification, that one on the Atlantic did not have vested rights. That was part of the negotiated settlement. All right, so we've had the motion, which is to approve the ordinance to provide for a moratorium on certain multifamily structures. It also includes a pending ordinance doctrine. I think we know that we can make changes at second reading, which would come next month. Are we prepared to vote? All right, all in favor of the motion to approve, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
So the motion passes 8-1. 7-1. I'm sorry, 7-1, we're missing someone, that's right. And all those other votes, I said 9-0, actually 8.
First reading, ordinance number 19015, an ordinance to provide for a moratorium on certain multifamily structures.
In case you didn't notice, Mr. O'Rourke had to be out of town tonight, but I'm sure he's watching on Facebook. So, hey, Tom, we miss you. All right, Mr. Olma. Section B, old business.
Yes, sir. These two are also related in covering an annexation of property and a rezoning. This is about 2/3 of an acre of land comprised of several parcels, and it is a request to annex and zone it area-wide Business 2. Planning Commission does not deal with the annexations in this particular case. The property is located here, effectively between Watermark and Stuart Ingles.
Move for
And
final reading.
We have a motion to approve
Second.
and a second. Any discussion? Yes, sir.
Mr. Olma, may I ask Mr. Olma a question?
Absolutely.
Mr. Olma, can you just go over some of the things that are allowable in area-wide business two for me? And in
Yes.
particular, I'd just like a rundown of what that allows, and also are hotels allowed?
Yes, hotels are allowed, a variety of uses that come up with AB2, group living facilities, continuing care retirement centers. Then we move into community and civic uses are allowed, cultural facility, for instance, educational facilities, could have a preschool, daycare. A lot of these have other conditions or requirements. Government facilities, recreation uses, there are some. And then we move into commercial uses and activities. Animal care, workshops, artist workshops and studios, eating and drinking establishments, some conditional. And then for lodging, I probably went by it, but I know it's included. Hotels are allowed.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Bustos first, then Mrs. Lanning.
Okay, and a little later on in the agenda, we're going to have an idea coming from the Planning Committee, because I think uppermost in your mind is that they're going to aggregate some of the properties and build a hotel. And that's been a concern in Charleston. We've seen it happen several times, and it's happened here at least once. So a little bit later in a report, you're going to hear that the Planning Committee has asked the planning staff to go back and take hotels out of the normal planning process, so that someone who wishes to develop a hotel will have to both find a piece of commercial property and then come back and ask town council specifically to build a hotel. That way, we won't be approving something for, let's say, an office building, and the developer will look at it and say, well, I really don't want to do an office building. I want to do a hotel. And we saw this happen a couple of times in Charleston. So Planning Committee has asked planning staff to go back and excise that from AB and make it a standalone request if a developer is going to do a hotel. And I think that may help your thoughts on that.
Yes, sir. Mr. Canay.
Yes, sir. The gentleman directed his inquiry to me. Thank you for that, Mr. Bustos. The issue I really have is that there's already 2 hotels there. There's a sign for a third starting right across the exit or highway there, and this would create a 4th. And what my concern becomes when you have 4, I know there's all this talk about zones. I don't like the zones and hub concept. I don't like 4 of them in one place, because what happens then is you have a grading of the hotels. You have a higher end, a medium end, and you end up at some point with somebody's not able to compete at the higher end. They say, well, let me just do a real cheap hotel. And that attracts things like prostitution. It attracts things like drug use and meth labs and other things. And I think we got to be really careful, keep cramming in hotels for that reason, zoning-wise. Secondary reason is we just don't have 43 firefighters on duty that are required for that type of occupancy. And we're rolling the dice every day. And I'll be voting no, mostly because of that reason. Thank you.
Ms. Lanning, you were next.
I reached out to the owner of the property to find out, we do not have any control if we zone this, once it's annexed and then we zone it. But at the same time, sometimes you can find out a lot just by asking questions, so I did. And A to Z Rental bought Hughes Rental, and they have a 5-year lease agreement, and they spent quite a bit of money to buy Hughes Rental. So they also have an option to extend that for 2 more years. So that would be theoretical, but that would be 7 years. So a lease is in place to this A to Z Rental for the next 5 years, possibly 7. Now, seems unlikely they would spend all that money to buy the business and then lease the space so that they could have it torn down to build a hotel. But again, I guess we don't have control over that. And then the owner's goal after that is to build Class A office space specific to the shipping industry, because as we know, Wando Shipping, the Port Authority has just moved over to this side of the bridge, and there's going to hopefully be, with our deepened harbor, a lot more shipping potential industry. So this would be an economic development project down the road. Now, we don't know any of that, that's speculative, but we're also speculating if we say it's a hotel, and I think it's better to at least ask the owner of the property what the conditions are, and at least right now, a lot of money was spent to buy a business and put a lease in place for 5 years, and no hotel.
Mr. Bremer?
Yeah, just as a reminder, the motion in this item is for zoning. It's not for, not for rezoning. This is for annexation. So if we could vote on the annexation first and then have a discussion on zoning following, that would be great.
Agree, thank you. Mr. Santos, this is just the annexation.
Okay, then I'll speak after that.
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor, the applicant did contact staff and, as many do, was concerned about being annexed and then not receiving the zoning that was being requested at the same time, because you have to do them in that particular order. So I don't know how you want to handle that zoning discussion, or...
We can't zone what's not in our jurisdiction, so everybody has to take that risk, yeah. Did you have another, or since this is the annexation, you wanted to defer to the...
Right.
Okay, all right. So the motion is to approve the annexation. Is there any other discussion? All right, all in favor of the motion to approve annexation of item B1, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion passes 8-0.
Final reading, ordinance number 19002, an ordinance to annex an approximately .66 acre tract of land in Charleston County comprised of 3 parcels. 1, a .12 acre parcel at 1259 Foxtail Lane. 2, a .31 acre parcel at 1251 Foxtail Lane. And 3, a .23 acre parcel on Melvin Bennett Road, shown on Plat Book BJ, page 169 in the Charleston County ROD.
Thank you very much. This brings us to item B2, which is the zoning of what we just annexed.
Yes, sir. Same property.
I don't think there's much more to say.
Same property, same location.
Okay, Mr.
Well, I just want to make it sure it's clear and everybody understands that we cannot condition zoning. So if we give them this zoning, they can cherry pick whatever they want. That happened across the street when the gentleman came in and wanted to connect those 2 properties, get the same zoning, because he just wanted to make them all the same. I remember asking him whether he wanted to do a hotel, and he said no, but I understand now a hotel's coming up. There's nothing we can really do about that. And as far as the 5-year contract, I think most contracts have termination clauses, and we don't know whether there's one there or not. So there could very well be a termination clause, because if he gets the zoning and gets what he wants, then who knows how fast that could be fast-tracked. So, for me, I don't think we could, like I said, we can't condition the zoning and tell him what he can and can't do. So I think it's a roll of the dice. If we do this, he has some opportunities, and I don't blame him. He owns the land. He wants to do what's best for him, but we got to do what's best for the public and for the surrounding area. And as Kevin said, with all the hotels coming up in that area, it's going to get real congested real fast. That intersection is already crazy in the morning and in the afternoon, and I just see it getting a lot worse if we're going to have another hotel right there.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, I have another question for Mr. Olma.
Absolutely.
Mr. Olma, can you explain what zonings exist for office uses outside of AB?
We have, this request is for AB 2.
Okay.
Can we go back to the zoning map while we're
Yes, sir.
discussing this, please?
So is there other,
there's
ways to do
OP
office?
Professional office. So there are a variety, a couple of districts that would allow office use.
It might require you to be a mind reader, but would you know why they would seek AB2 when a limited office zoning would allow an office?
If I may jump in, I spoke with the owner. He wants to do a food truck court there as well, so that people don't have to leave Midtown or Central Mount Pleasant and get on the roads and everything, and they'll be right there. And if you look, that's a business parkway right there, and that's what he said he wants to put there.
So it could be a variety
He
of
also
other.
said he was going to put an office, so we don't know. And the thing about AB is that you're giving them a blank check to build whatever they'd like. And some of those are intense uses that do really impact people nearby.
Yes, sir, Mr. Owens.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I spoke to the property owner as well, like most of you did. And he's telling me that it was all, he's looking to put an office professional in there into these parcels of property. Mr. Alma, do you have any idea what the acreage is in that triangular piece of property though? Would you say
The grand total?
3.5 acres, something like that?
Probably.
And do you have any idea what the development standards are for a hotel? Say, would you agree that 80 rooms would occupy, according to the development standards, 1.7 acres?
It's probably equivalent to what's occurred across the street.
Right. And 140 rooms is 2.5 acres. And I have no doubt that the owner is going to perform what he promises. But again, it comes down to the zoning being administered to that piece of property. And things can change over a period of time, and then you can collectively develop on that 3.5 acre site, and it leaves a lot to be desired. But I don't know that I can support this, being that there's some potential there. In 7 years, there's a lot that can happen in 7 years, Ms. Lanning. I'm concerned that maybe the food truck doesn't work out. But be that as it may, I can't support that.
Mr. Mayor?
I'm checking. We did have a motion, or?
No.
We haven't had a motion yet,
We don't have a
just
motion yet.
discussion so
Okay.
far.
Just one clarification that may help. Because of the existing uses on the property, primarily that has outdoor storage and activities, the AB2 zoning would be needed now
continue
to
the use.
accommodate the existing uses that are there, not make it non-conforming or whatever. So he's trying to deal probably with both what's already on the property, and then in the long term, what kind of uses could be located there.
Hang on a second. Mrs. Landing was next. Mr. Brimmer, will you? Okay, and then Mr. Brimmer.
Okay, so again, a lot of talk about the hotel that went in across the way, different subject, but certainly in the same neighborhood, right across the street. But again, this is already what was Hughes Rental, if we can picture in our minds, the Bowman Road, and then this little side road is that one that goes back behind Mediterranean Shipping, that whole complex there. So we're talking about a very small part where the Hughes Rental, A to Z rental now is going to stay. Now, again, according to Mr. Santos, and that's probably true, you can change 5-year leases, but they paid quite a bit of money for the business, and they have a 5-year lease for the land to stay in that spot. So again, for a while, a hotel wouldn't be there. Now, I have another concern. If we're going to get into the practice, we have a lot of donut holes, unincorporated areas all throughout Mount Pleasant. We've had a lot of discussion about the importance of bringing in some great industry to diversify our economy, which hopefully is going to involve annexing in property that is currently donut holes. We have at least 2 that we're currently working on. If we get in the habit and have a reputation of bringing people in under annexation and then turning them down for the zoning they asked for, nobody is going to ask to annex in. And what happens when nothing annexes in? Absolutely no taxes, no revenue, no anything comes to the town of Mount Pleasant, but we still have to provide emergency services and everything else because they're within our town limits. So I think we need to be very careful at what kind of signal we're sending if we'll annex in, but then turn down that request to become the property zoning that they need.
Thank you, Mr. Brimmer.
Yeah, so one question, and then maybe more than one question, but so at this point, we voted for annexation, which means this property comes in as R1, correct? If nothing else is done?
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
So it's, right now, if this request for rezoning does not happen, we've got a residential piece of property zoned. Now, do you have a zoning map? Okay, so surrounding this property, on 3 sides is AB2, which is what they're requesting, correct?
Yes,
And
the darker red, and the gold is AB.
AB, okay. So there is some surrounding AB, but primarily it's surrounded by AB2, so this would be consistent with what's currently surrounding this property. Okay, thank you.
And the pink, purple colors, hard to distinguish. You could have neighborhood commercial and/or office professional.
Mr. Bustos?
You know, we seem to have a lot of questions. I'd like to make a motion that we defer this until we can send it back to the planning committee and get some answers, and then we can get down past the zoning changes that I asked for, and that may allay some fears that people have. But I think there's been enough talk and enough questions that we probably need to ask more.
Let me get a legal ruling on that, but we've already annexed. So it comes in as R1. So for the time being, we would be creating a piece of R1 property that we know is being used for AB2.
Well, next, no, it wouldn't be second reading. This is second reading.
That's the question.
correct?
This is final reading.
The pieces that you would be zoning, I'm not sure
I think they're used for.
if they're actually
They've got
being used for the
boats,
AB2, so you'd
Right.
have
There's boat
AB2
storage
next to the
there.
R1. Ultimately, when it's AB2, it could be then combined for the entire parcel.
Right.
The entire property. It's currently R4 residential in the county, 4 units to the acre.
So, and it's how much acreage total?
2/3 of an acre combined,
0.66 or something.
0.66.
I think so.
So if the owner wanted in the county, he could build residential units right there on our business parkway, is that correct?
It would be annexed,
Into the town.
so it'd be
That's right,
ours.
well, we did first reading annexation.
Right, no, this
No, we
was
did
final.
final
That's right,
reading.
we did final. That's right, it passed first, and it passed final.
Isn't it true he could just pull his request and then build a house?
No, he's in the town now. So the question remains, do we want a piece of R1 property sitting there?
There's plenty of residential around, if you look. I mean, not just right
Yeah,
in that
but-
spot, but there's plenty of it around there, and
I'll go ahead.
I'll just say, having driven down there, that's not residential property. That's commercial property on a business parkway, in my opinion. Mr. Canane, yes, sir.
Someone on the prevailing side could make a motion to reconsider the final reading, correct, Mr. Pagliarini?
Correct.
So then that would solve the problem that you're speaking of.
It would have to be in this meeting,
That's correct.
yes.
For the annexation.
All right, I think we've beat a dead horse. Are we prepared to vote?
We didn't do a motion yet.
There's no second.
Yeah, I withdraw my motion to defer.
Okay, there,
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion, we deny.
Second.
we have a motion on item B2 to deny.
Deny.
All right, are we prepared to vote? All right, all in favor of the motion to deny signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed?
No.
I believe, all who are no, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 6. Okay.
Wait a minute. No's. Wait a minute.
No, the motion is to deny.
Right.
So a no vote does not deny the request.
Oh, no.
3 to 5.
Okay, so all opposed to the denial, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So it's 5 to 3. Do we have, so the motion to deny fails.
I make a motion that we approve the request for the AB2 zoning.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion to approve, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Oh.
1, 2, 3. So by the same vote, 5 to 3, the motion to approve passes.
It's final reading, ordinance number 19004, an ordinance to zone AB2, area-wide business 2 district, an approximately .66 acre tract of land comprised of 3 parcels. 1, a .12 acre parcel at 1259 Foxtail Lane. 2, a .31 acre parcel at 1251 Foxtail Lane. And 3, a .23 acre parcel on Melvin Bennett Road, shown in Plat Book BJ, page 169, Charleston County, ROD.
All right, that concludes that section of the agenda, which brings us to item 9, committee reports. Bids and Purchases Committee, Mr. Owens.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. The committee unanimously approved the following recommendation. Approval to contract with Rhythm Engineering in the amount of $279,298.50 to provide in-sync systems upgrade for 9 intersections and hardware to 3 intersections for a total of 12 intersections as part of the Coleman Boulevard project. The committee received an update on the construction manager at risk process, which is a new construction procurement method for the town and is being utilized for the Fire Station Number 4 project. The committee received the quarterly local vendor program report for the second quarter fiscal year 2019, $4.7 million, or 18% of the town's expenditures were to local town of Mount Pleasant vendors for a total year-to-date amount of $5.4 million, or 19% of all town expenditures. This concludes my report.
Thank you, sir. Economic Development Committee, Mrs. Lanning.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I have a brief meeting, report, and that is that, first of all, we had an executive session to discuss a contractual matter, which will be presented to council tonight. And then the second part was a also brief discussion regarding proactively reaching out in the community with both incorporated and unincorporated parcels of land to try to find businesses and services that will serve our people.
Great, thank you. No Education Committee, Finance Committee, Mr. O'Rourke is not here. I don't know if there's someone, okay, that's you. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chairman O'Rourke asked me to fill in since I'm on the Finance Committee. So we had several items, but first of all, we started with the recognition. The committee recognized Brad Walbeck, our benefits manager, for 5 years of service with the town of Mount Pleasant. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but a lot of information was shared about how much money Brad has saved the town and a lot of the ways that he has really worked hard with the rest of his staff to change our benefits package and so forth, so that was great. And then the other items, we had 3 report items. One is the Finance Committee discussed using part of the general fund balance for the purchase of a fire ladder, truck, and pumper. This was just discussed, not decided upon. Secondly, we discussed the pursuit of a SAFER, or Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response grant, for the hiring of firefighters, and noted that it has a deadline coming up March 22nd, I believe. And then we also listened to a presentation from Catherine Main, the Executive Director of the East Cooper Land Trust, requesting the town allow the East Cooper Land Trust to apply for the town's Greenbelt funding to purchase a conservation easement on the Geechee Dock property, and there was no vote taken on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Fire Committee, Mr. Bremer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a couple of action items for this evening. I'll start with number 1, which is a recommendation to amend the 2019-2023 Fire Department Strategic Plan to meet the minimum national standards of 4-person staffing on each apparatus.
So moved.
Go ahead.
Okay. The Fire Committee reviewed and discussed a potential firefighting staffing ordinance, which was the agenda item, which would require a minimum of daily staffing of 4 personnel on each engine and ladder truck. The committee recommended, instead of an ordinance, to amend the fire department strategic plan to reflect this staffing model. And I think it is important to note that this involves a great deal of money, millions of dollars actually, that we certainly can't do in year 1, and I'm not sure that we can even get there in year 5, but I think it's aspirational in that I think we would all like to move the fire department to that higher standard over time, and I think each year we would expect that the administrator would bring forward steps toward that goal to get as close to that as we can during the 5-year strategic plan. But no, this is a big-ticket item that will require multi-year investments going forward. So given that, I would like to, as such, I move that council accept the amended strategic plan reflecting the minimum national standards of 4-person staffing on each apparatus.
Second.
It's from committee, does not require a second. We have the motion. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I believe this issue came to the Finance Committee first, and we sent it to the over to the Fire Committee. I think a decision with this amount of money needs to go back to the Finance Committee. That's what we expected, was the Fire Committee to send it back to us So I'm kind of surprised that we're now making a motion on this when it should really come back to the Finance Committee to find out how we go pay for this. You just said it's a tremendous amount of money. I think the Fire Committee should be the one to take a look at it and research it and make sure that we can afford to do it.
Yeah, if I may respond. Mr. Santos, you're correct, and that's why we decided not to make this an ordinance, but to put it in a strategic plan. That does not commit the town to a certain amount of money this year or future years. I think as the administrator brings forward budgets each year, the Finance Committee will then have to weigh in with that priority versus everything else. So this is just a way for us to say this is our ultimate goal to move toward in the future. But we've already added staff this year, firefighter positions this year. I believe there's a request for some additional positions next year, and we have a grant that's going to ask for 6 more positions. So we are taking steps to add positions in the coming year already, but we're not asking for those dollars to be added to the budget necessarily with this motion. This is just to change the plan to say this is the direction we're moving into.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Bustos.
Yeah, I just have, if we get this grant,
Could you step up to the mic?
That's the next agenda item, Joe, we're going to talk about. After this, the next agenda item we're going to talk about. So if we can hold that comments about the grant until next item.
Right.
okay.
Okay.
So the motion is to approve an amendment to the, or a change to the strategic plan. I discussed it with our attorney yesterday. This is an administrative thing and it's aspirational. It does not tie the Finance Committee. So the Finance Committee will have a decision.
Thank you for making that
I think
clear.
the committee agrees with that. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Whitley.
Can we hear from our fire chief on his thoughts on this?
What's that?
Can we hear from our fire chief on his thoughts on this?
I guess we can.
Good evening. Yeah, so we brought y'all a strategic plan initially that y'all supported in December. We thought that it was an aggressive plan, but yet not too much of a plan that we may not be able to fund it all in that 5-year cycle. We're happy to, if it's your will, to take on this 4-person staffing, but we do worry that if we take on too much, maybe it doesn't all get funded, and our focus really is on that first plan. We do support staffing just like every other department in the town. We'd love additional staffing, but our first priority is that meat of that strategic plan. So whatever direction you really give us, we'll take it and we'll run with it and do the best, but we brought you a plan that we believed in.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question? All right. Yes, sir. Mr. Knight.
Question for the chief as well. Chief, I think we spoke 2 weeks ago. We spoke again at the committee last week. And the question was, has there been any credible fire department source whatsoever that you're aware of that pushes for 3 firefighter staffing as opposed to 4? Because we know NFPA 1710 is, without question, the nationally accepted minimum standard. And it's been proven by a lot of bad fires that that's the way to go. 5 departments right in this area made a change as a result of a horrific fire. Somehow Mount Pleasant didn't. I guess the town was a little small at the time, and now it's grown significantly. My concern was the 5-year lookout. We're going to be approaching 100,000 people or more. We still don't have the staffing in town for the buildings we have in town, let alone having 2 incidents at once. So the question is, Chief, and yeah, it's been another week. Have you learned of anyone pushing for 3 as opposed to 4 in the fire service community at all?
No, sir, and you're right. I mean, the NFPA outlines that as their minimum, and that is the national standard that pretty much everybody accepts. And, we've talked about it before, that our trucks are spec'd under that. And it's a really broad thing that encompasses a lot and would take a lot of money to be fully NFPA compliant. But to answer your question, no, I've never seen anything that pushes for 3 or anything else.
Well, and this motion is what this council wants, and so coming from committee, it was decided that in the future we'd like to move toward this standard, and it's a national standard. It's recognized, and it will only make our department stronger, I think, as we get there. So we'll have to trust our administrator and our fire department staff year by year to prioritize those things in the plan and to bring forward in the budget those things that are most appropriate for the town of Mount Pleasant.
Understood. All right, we prepared to vote. We have a motion to approve the amendment to the fire department strategic plan. Give me just a second here. And this is item F1. All right. So a yes vote is to approve the amendment. All in favor of the motion to amend, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 2 is a recommendation to apply for the FY18 SAFER grant and funding for 6 additional firefighters. The Fire Committee reviewed and discussed the staffing for adequate fire and emergency response grant. The committee recommended to instruct staff to apply for the SAFER grant and request funding for 6 additional firefighters. The original request, I believe, was for 15 or 16. After discussion with committee, we thought 6 would be more appropriate for the coming year. As you all saw as an attachment to the Fire Committee minutes, there is a breakdown of the costs involved. Total for 6 firefighters is $327,087. Year 1, the match for the grant, if we're awarded the grant, would be $81,700. Year 2, the same. By year 3, it's $212,000, and by year 4, $376,000. That would be the full cost of those firefighters. So we're told by our finance staff that that $81,000 could be incorporated into the coming year's budget. So this is a request to apply for this grant. We haven't been guaranteed it yet, so we'll have to wait and see whether we get approved. But this is to submit the application.
So it's only an authorization to apply for the grant?
Correct.
Okay. It came from committee. It does not require a second, so we have a motion on the floor. We're in discussion. Yes, sir, Mr.
Yeah, I
Santos.
just want to speak on behalf of the Finance Committee. Tom's not here, so I feel like I got to at least talk. This grant, when the grant terminates, who's going to be responsible for paying all these to Town of Mount Pleasant?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Once again, this is, to me, is a Finance Committee issue, and I think it should come to the Finance Committee. We sound like we're spending money here, but, the Finance Committee hadn't even had a chance to review it and look at it, and I just think it should come to the Finance Committee. Tom's not here, so he can't speak, but I feel like surely that he would probably request the same thing, that it comes to there so that we can research it and make sure we can pay for it down the line.
So that we're not all discussing, this is, it has a March 22nd deadline, so we could apply, be awarded the grant, and then, as I understand it, we could still turn it down for those reasons. So this is only to apply.
Right.
So if we get awarded it and decide to turn it down based on the Finance Committee's recommendation, then we don't have to go that way.
Kind of sounds like we're going through the back door, but
I understand, but that's the unfortunate nature. The deadline is 10 days from now. So if we don't have time, unless the Finance Committee wants to call a special meeting, and
I
the
can't speak
chairman's
for the
not
chairman.
here. Right.
Yeah, he's not here.
Right. I agree with you. That would be the normal way to do it, but with a 10-day deadline. Let me ask this. Is the deadline to submit, to get it submitted, or to give notice of our intent to submit?
It's to submit.
Do we have enough time to put the grant application together? We do?
We will.
We will? All right.
If that's council's desire, we will make sure it happens.
Okay. Yes, sir. Mr. Kane.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. As I discussed in prior meetings, we had 4 months of discussions about where the fire department is, and we discussed engines individually, then ladders, and then the redundancy, and then the station placement. And the big picture is that we need to move the department forward in staffing. That's not to look back and blame anyone or anything like that. It's just a forward look that says we need to improve based on the size of the town. We've expanded in population dramatically. The department has actually dipped a little bit in the apparatus availability. So it's time. And I tried twice to ask for a fire committee, and for various reasons it wasn't held. So here we are up against the deadline, and that's why we're up against the deadline. And we already just agreed to reach the standard. The way you reach the standard isn't to try and hire 18 or 20 firefighters in 1 year. You have to spread it out, and this is a good way to do it, because we're getting some of the money back. And even though finance might want to opine on it, finance is going to have plenty of time over the 5 years to opine on the whole thing, and maybe it stretches. I'm not proposing this, but maybe it stretches to 7 years or 8 years to get it done. The idea is we have a funding source sitting there for the taking. The 5-year plan that we approved includes a new ladder company to be purchased and staffed hopefully in the beginning part of the 5-year plan. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chief. to get that done, you have to hire firefighters. And we've used very similar grants for police hiring in the past. It's really not that controversial. The FEMA grant provides that we pay a portion for 5 years, and then we pick up the full cost at the end, but they're picking up along the way significant amounts of money that we would basically be throwing away by not doing this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Landing.
So two things. One is in Finance Committee, we did discuss this, and we, of course, had to put everything back to hear what Fire had to say first about it. But one of the things we noticed, which Councilman Tanine has already shared, is that if we were to hire more firefighters, that certainly having this grant money would help offset costs for the next 3 years. Not entirely, but it will be a declining scale. So 4 years out is when we would be responsible for the full cost. And I would hope, based on the strat plan change, that we would have 6 more at least by then. So that part all seems very reasonable. And then I just want to make one comment in regard to the applying for various grants from FEMA or anyone else based on emergency needs and first responder needs. Is, to my knowledge, up until this point, all of the needs of what we had for first responders have come from the chiefs themselves. So that's the part about this that was a little bit different.
Thank you. All right.
Just one last thing.
Yes, please.
I would just appreciate that when a committee asks another committee to respond back to them with the information, that's what happens, that we don't find out during the council meeting what's going on. So, you know, if y'all guys, the committee came to us and asked us for something, we would certainly come back. I just don't think it's right that we ask to come back and it's not. It's coming to full council, and my chairman's not here to give his opinion. So just looks like we're moving this pretty fast through, and it didn't go through the proper channels that it was supposed to go through. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, one more, and let's
Just real
get on.
quickly, Mayor, I just want to add that the reason for the sense of urgency is because time is of the essence. We're running out of time, and so it's just to vote on this grant.
Right, and we can have the Finance Committee take a look at this, weigh in at the next meeting, or when would we find out if we receive it or not? How long's the decision process? By summer, okay. And we can always have the Finance Committee say we can't get there from here. So there is a check there, but I agree with your comments. All right, let's go ahead and let's vote. The motion is to approve the application for the SAFER grant for the hiring of 6 firefighters. This is item F2. All in favor of the motion to approve the application signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Mr. Mayor, based on the conversation of these items last month, I do want to just give 2 quick updates on 2 other agenda items. Committee did discuss the placing of the fire department strategic plan in a priority funding position. After some discussion about what that really meant, committee did decide that a semi-annual review of the progress on the strategic plan would be held in committee, just so that we can maintain where we are, what needs to happen next, and that will help us to stay on track over the 5 years. So that was the action that came out of that discussion. Fire Committee also discussed the purchase of a ladder truck and pumper from the fund balance. There was some discussion about the best way to do that, which would be the use of discretionary funds, but after a presentation by our financial staff, Ms. Kotoff, our finance director, there was no motion to move forward with the purchase of any vehicles in this coming budget year, because there is a plan for replacement of those vehicles and new vehicles in future years in the strat plan. And that concludes my report, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. Human Resources, there was no meeting. Patriots Point Development Authority, that would be me. There is a meeting Friday that I will miss. I have to be out of state on Friday. One of the things that they will be hearing this month is the proposed master plan of Patriots Annex that I don't know how long it'll take them to make decisions or authorize that. I've told them I will not be voting on it there because I have to vote on it here. And so that may be in 2 months or 3 months coming through here. And we do know that the Medal of Honor Society, the Society, and Patriots Point are discussing some future plans for which they will come to us and let us know what to do with our remaining, $1.2 million that we had approved for the moving of the road. So I've told them we need some direction. We don't want to leave something sitting out there, and as soon as plans come together or don't come together, to let us know so we could take action on that. But for now, there's no action. Planning Committee, Mr. Bustos, anything?
Thank you. The Planning Committee did talk about hotels and self-storage uses and how the current regulations might be amended to provide greater control of their location. So we have asked staff to provide this information in the April Planning Committee. And those are the ideas of taking those uses out. We also discussed building heights in the Johnny Dodds, Chuck Dolly portions of the Boulevard Overlay District. In particular, the line between 80-foot buildings and 55-foot buildings along Johnny Dodds in the vicinity of Houston Northcutt. So we'll be looking at that next week as well, and staff will be providing information. Lastly, on short-term rentals, the key components that we have now, although we're still working on the short-term rental, are annual permit fees and a fee for that business permit and a fee. Grandfathering provisions to phase in the regulations, applicability to owner-occupied dwellings, a reduced safety inspection program, and again, a 1% cap on the number of short-term rentals in proportion to all dwelling units in the town. And those are all going to be updated and looked at in the April committee meeting. That's all I have.
Thank you. Police, Judicial, and Legal Committee, we have several things for council action. We're on J1 at this point. The first is approval of a resolution supporting a bill in the South Carolina Legislature, House 3355, also known as the Hands-Free While Driving Bill. This is only a resolution that we would like the state to govern, just like they did with texting while driving. And Mr. Bremer, I didn't know if you want to expand upon that. I mean, it's just a resolution. We can move on in the sake of time, but I might have given it too brief a description. I don't know.
No, that was fine. This came forward from constituents in Mount Pleasant who basically are stating the obvious, which is our roads are getting more dangerous by people continuing to use electronic devices while driving. This House bill, Representative Taylor from Aiken has put it forward. It's scheduled for, it's on the contested docket for the House coming up later this month for debate. And I think it's a common sense thing for us to keep our roads safer, and appreciate the conversation that was held at the committee.
Okay. That and item 2, approval to improve the structure of the town council agenda. Both of these are in item 11, council new business. So we will get to that when we get to that portion of the agenda. We just have some things that we think will shorten our council meetings. We did a graph. We have gone from averaging 2 to 2.5 hours to 4.5 to 5.5 hours. And we're just looking for a way to be more efficient and provide better government. Item K, so we'll get to those. Item K is Public Services Committee.
Yeah, thank you,
Yes.
Mayor. Item 1 is the approval of amendments to the environmentally acceptable packaging and products ordinance that will be discussed in new business, item 11A3. The report is as follows. The committee approved the minutes of January 3rd, 2019 meeting. There were 3 topics discussed. First topic was the presentation given by Mr. Peel and Davison Floyd, providing a review of the Public Services Department Facility Master Plan. It was agreed to proceed with the design and construction as part of the approval or the approved fiscal year 19 capital improvements plan. Second presentation was given by Thomas and Hutton, and provided an update on the village drainage improvement project for Edwards and Royal drainage basins. The final topic discussed was a consideration of amendments to the environmentally acceptable packaging and products ordinance. This will be addressed as discussed in item 11A3. That concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Recreation, no meeting. Transportation, we met, and before I get to what was on our committee agenda, I do want to mention about Highway 41. It's down to 2 alternatives, and there will be public meetings on it. Everybody's got the information. Everybody, I'm speaking to council. Everybody on council knows about those. But it's time to, not that it has never been, but it's, the window is closing. The recommendation for the preferred alternative will be late summer, early fall. So as we get into spring and summer, let's don't lose our focus of the stakeholder meetings, the public meetings, and all the things we can do to try to get that going in the right direction. As far as our committee meeting, we saw a presentation on design concepts for Park West Boulevard and Stockdale Drive intersection. We also saw concepts for the Long Point Road Maritime District, and this was strictly conceptual at that time. We did a status of the possible improvements at Park Avenue and Faison Road, and about whether traffic signals were warranted and the timetable for those. We had the consultants speak to us about the residential parking permit study in the Old Village area. 6 people came to the hearing. No action was taken by the committee. I think we need to look further into the findings of the consultant, which was that they did not recommend that parking permit system would be very successful. We had a discussion of Lucy Beckham High School bicycle and pedestrian access. And so that was the gist of that meeting. Waterworks Commission, that would be me as well. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Bustos, and water supply.
Okay, we didn't have a water supply meeting with the Water Commission. We attended the semi-annual retreat where they went over a broad overview of the water department. And also, just to remind that cell phone tower remains to be an item of interest, and I expect that it will be back next month with a different request.
Right. And we'll also mention that at Waterworks Commission's next meeting, as we heard in our special called meeting, they will be getting briefed by their attorney specifically to Snowden about the fact that it is an unusual situation where phase 1 of that, because it was a federal grant, they were not allowed to enforce the annexation law of the town of Mount Pleasant. We have not rescinded that law, but phase 2 in Snowden is a different animal, and it is up to the commission to decide how they want to apply our law. We were also told that we have no authority to enforce our law outside the limits of the town of Mount Pleasant. So that concludes committee reports. Administrators report, item 10.
Thank you, Mayor. Very quickly, just announcing vacancies on the Old Village Historic District Commission as well as the Historical Commission.
Thank you. This moves us to item 11, council new business. Item A1 is the adoption of the resolution requesting the State General Assembly to pass H.R. 3355. That's the distracted drivers using electronic devices while driving.
Move for adoption.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
I'd like to just share one quick thing. I have found out a lot of people never heard of this, but it's practically like a public service announcement. If you have a teenager who has any doubt as to whether it's fair for this to be an issue, I would encourage you to rent 7 Pounds. It was not a very well-known movie, but it was Will Smith, which, of course, he's very popular with young people, and it is an unbelievable story that I think is a real story, but even if it wasn't a real story, it's a terrific opportunity. A rocket scientist who thought he was smart enough to handle texting and driving and what happens. And it's a fabulous movie, so rent it even if you don't have a teenager, if you can.
Thank you very much. So we have a motion to approve on item A1. Hang on just a second. All in favor of the motion to approve the resolution signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimous.
Resolution 19031.
Item A2 is first reading on a code of ordinances to refine our agenda. You see the numbers there. Our committee looked at all of these, and the committee voted unanimously to recommend to council that we pass these on first reading. Christiane, if you'll give us a brief overview.
Good evening. This ordinance that's been prepared for you has been considered for the past 2 months in Police, Judicial, Legal Committee, and so I'm going to first provide you with a really quick overview and then also share with you the exhibit that was provided in the PGL Committee. Running through this, first slide on the presentation, one of the proposals is to change the start time of the meeting, to move it back to 5:30, so 30 minutes earlier, and this would allow for some time to get a lot of the awards and presentations completed and then start business at approximately 6 o'clock. We would also propose changing the order of business, and I've highlighted a couple of things here for you. You'll see it illustrated on the exhibit a little more clearly in a second, but these all things are provided in order to increase the efficiency of the meeting. We are proposing a new consent agenda section, and the way this will work is that we will have items on the agenda that are up for final reading that had unanimous approval at first reading. And we'll have a whole new section that explains how that procedure works. If somebody has an issue and wants to debate something further that's on the consent item agenda, it can actually be removed, so you won't have to run through the consent. It can actually be reviewed later on the agenda. Another proposal is to move all public comment to the beginning of the meeting. So instead of how we often have people comment, especially during planning items, allow for additional comments, instead all public comment would be at the beginning of the meeting. There's a few other amendments related to public comment that are just really that's in the section 3035, to provide for consistency and to make sure that we maintain public comment at all of our other public meetings. And then finally, to amend the ordinances so that when our administrator is reading the ordinances, they do not have to be read by title, but instead can just be read by number. And so an exhibit that will show you kind of what this could look like. This is one of our older agendas that we've modified. You'll see in the top in the toolbox, we are showing that we're going to have a hyperlink to our committee minutes. This is because one of the proposals is to actually remove the committee reports, instead of only have committee action items on the agenda. So we will have a link directly to the minutes for people to review what actually occurred at the meeting. You see the change for the meeting time. Awards and presentations, we would suggest that those be more limited than what they sometimes can be. Longevity awards, we would remove the 20-year recognition from the council agenda. Those would just be recognized at committee. So only those individuals with 25 years plus would be recognized at council. We would propose removing Employee of the Month. Our Employee Relations Committee has been working hard to come up with other ways to recognize our employees for their great work. Public comment, I've already explained that. That puts all public comment at this early part of the meeting before you begin your business. The consent items, you will see that will be an entirely new section. And so when we come to this section, if everybody is okay with all the items that were listed, there will be no discussion, no debate. Those will just be read. The ordinances will just be read, and that will be completed in that fashion. Planning would stay the same, as you see, although some items might move to the consent agenda items, so that could potentially go a little bit shorter. Committee action items, I've explained that already, no longer have reports, but just the actual action items would appear in this section, and removal of the administrator's report. And so that is what the agenda would look like, and the ordinance that has been prepared for you this evening incorporates everything that I've reviewed. I don't have any questions.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
So I was talking to Mr. Pagliarini. This is listed as one ordinance. To vote tonight, we would vote on it all, first reading. It would pass or come back for second reading next month, and if there are amendments, we would make amendments then, but we have to vote on it as presented this way for first reading tonight. One thought I had, and I guess this is a legal question, can we make it effective, maybe not immediately the very next month, but give 60 days notice that starting with, April, starting with the May meeting, we'll be meeting earlier and the agenda will look different, so that we have time to get that out to the public?
Yes, sir, that we discussed that, staff did, and that is one of the considerations that I think council should consider.
Okay, that would be great. Yes, sir, Mr. Brimmer.
Christiane, was there any discussion about adding the annexations to the consent agenda, since we typically roll through those unanimously anyway, except for me?
Well, certainly if it had, during first reading was unanimous, then that would automatically put it for final reading under the consent agenda.
Annexations, aren't they just one?
Oh, I'm sorry, you're talking about for first read? No, they're
Yes.
2 readings.
Okay, so,
You want to add it?
we just, what's that?
You want to add it to the?
I was just thinking, we kind of roll through those anyway. There's very simple, very little discussion on those, where that wouldn't be an appropriate place to place them on the consent agenda anyway.
We could, we certainly could do that. I mean, often, as you know, as we discussed a little bit tonight, sometimes, you know, they follow one another, the annexation and then the zoning request, and end up being kind of discussed as one. But if you would like to separate them, we could certainly put them under consent for first reading as well as for final, if they were unanimous.
I may suggest that for second reading.
Our issue with that is we, as staff, and they may be generally unanimous, our issue is we don't know that. It doesn't mean any council member can't pull it out. But I'm just giving you the why as to we weren't really thinking along the first reading, you know, having the consent agenda for first reading, but it certainly is permissible.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Canoe.
Yeah, I kind of think this whole thing's based on a faulty premise. The idea that we have to have a short meeting. You know, I look at things through a prism of someone who once worked 24-hour shifts, and I just can't really reconcile how elected officials that are asked to meet basically one night a month are trying to shorten the meeting. I have no problem with the consent agenda because it can be just more efficient, but I have a problem with moving public comment away from the agenda and back to the beginning, mainly because not everybody can get here at 6 o'clock. You know, there's a parent waiting at home up in my neighborhood for their spouse to get home so they can get down here, and they may not get here by 6 o'clock because of the travel conditions across the town. I think it's unfair to the people that live further away. So I don't think that's right, and I don't think it's fair. In addition, I think this whole exercise is missing a key component, which I think I discussed at the legal committee, which is how does a council member get something on the agenda? One council member is a chairperson. They can put whatever they want on their agenda. Another person's not a chairperson. They can't put anything on the agenda. So it creates a pecking order that the law of how the town is created under state law really doesn't account for that. I think it's kind of a gray area, and it could be considered an abuse of how the town is supposed to run.
If I may,
So,
if I may interrupt, let Mr. Pagliarini clear the legal
Yes,
aspect
sir.
of that.
Just for your comfort on that second item about placing matters on agenda, that's going back to PLJ next month. That was brought up, but it wasn't fully developed, and staff is working on that. So that will be essentially part 2 of
A
what you're
second exercise to
Yes,
look
sir.
at that.
That's correct.
Okay, so mainly that 30.34 and whatever changes to 30.35 that move public comment, I would take objection to, mainly because of the distances traveled. And, you know, there's people that work until 5 o'clock in North Charleston. Are they going to get here in time to speak? I think it's only fair. Again, we're being asked to work one night a week. I think both chiefs sitting here could tell us their people are working every single night of the month and a lot longer hours than us. We should just suck it up and be ready to perform our duties that one night a month that we're being asked. Thank you.
As the chair of the committee, I would just respond that it's not about us and how much we work. It's about primarily, like when I saw the folks from John Bartram Way who showed up to hear us address a safety issue about closing a public street for them for the safety of their family, and they waited for hours and hours, and I saw several of those young families have to leave. This way, one, we will get through our agenda without going on for 5.5 hours. And second, we know that when you come and speak, you will get to speak whether your item is deferred, delayed, tabled, withdrawn, whatever. When you show up to speak, if you know that you speak during public comments, that's when you will speak, and you will be heard, and we'll hear you. Any other comments? All right, do we have a motion? Well, it's from committee.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve item number A2. Second. And a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion to approve, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
The motion passes 7-1.
First reading, ordinance number 19016, an ordinance to amend Code of Ordinances, sections 30.21, 30.29, 30.33, 30.34, 30.35, and 30.46, and to create new sections 30.33 and 30.36, all related to public meeting procedures.
Thank you. Item A3 has to do with an ordinance to amend a section of our Mount Pleasant Code of Ordinances pertaining to environmentally acceptable packaging and products, which is already an existing ordinance that was signed last April and becomes enforced on this April the 16th. Mr. Owens, this came through your committee, so please take it away.
Correct. I appreciate it, Mr. Mayor. As all of you know, we were sent a letter by the Retail Association asking for consideration for some amendments that they were offering as suggestions. The committee took a look at those. We also met prior with the public's government relations manager, and we discussed those amendments. The committee didn't find anything that was that gave us any indication that it would detract from the ordinance. In fact, it would make it stronger. And we wanted to send this on to council for approval. And this is as outlined in the agenda packet, pages 68 through 70. And I would just move that we approve the amendments.
Would you like to expand just a little, in case anybody has questions? I know council's probably read it, but if the public's wondering what we're amending, go ahead.
Absolutely. It's pertaining to some South Carolina DHEC retail food establishment regulations, 60-2025, or similar safety regulations. It also is considering having clear plastic windows on products such as the chicken boxes and so forth. And
pastries.
More importantly, pastries,
Yes,
Mayor.
sir.
And also the grocery establishments are predominantly made of paper, including wax paper, but particularly the cross-contamination, eliminate the cross-contamination possibility. And so these suggestions, I think, are prudent, and they will stand to make our ordinance stronger.
Great. And is that a motion from your committee?
It
Which
is.
does not require a second to approve. So we have a motion on item A3 about amending an ordinance of our environmentally acceptable packaging ordinance. Is there any discussion? Anybody here to address it? All right, all in favor of the motion to approve the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimous.
First reading, ordinance number 19017, an ordinance to amend section 53.06 of chapter 53 of the Mount Pleasant Code of Ordinances pertaining to environmentally acceptable packaging and products.
This moves us to section 11B, council old business. Number 1 is final reading of an ordinance to amend the budget for the town of Mount Pleasant for the fiscal year 1819.
Move final reading.
We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Would you like to just highlight these briefly?
Yes, sir. I want to add that since the time of the first reading, there are 3 additional items are presented for consideration. The first is a matching up to $50,000 for this fiscal year for Housing for All Mount Pleasant. The second is an increase in judgment and losses account in the amount of $2.6 million. And the final is the appropriation of $4.4 million of fund balance for potential purchase of property.
And
If-
Ms. Kotov, if I may, for
Yes, sir.
council, that $4.4 million must be appropriated by council. So if you need us to act in a way that you determine we're able to do that and then don't have to wait 2 more readings to be able to do that.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Mr. Paglioni, are we past the point where to elucidate a little bit about the judgment and losses that we can, right here?
Yes, sir.
Because it's really not,
There's a
we
work-
didn't lose a case. in other
Right.
words.
As part of the allocation, and, as council voted, we're working through resolution, a significant portion of which involves the purchase of property as it relates to Park West. In addition, though, it is part of that case, so it's not really allocated out in any specific way, but as council is aware, that's the purpose.
Thank you. All right, so do we have a motion on item B1, please?
You already had yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we did, to approve. All right. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion to approve item B1 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 8-0 passes.
Final reading, ordinance number 19007, an ordinance to amend the budget for the town of Mount Pleasant, South Carolina for the fiscal year commencing July 1st, 2018 and ending June 30th, 2019.
Item-
Mr. Demore, did that motion get you what you needed to move forward?
Yes.
It did, okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Item B2 is an ordinance authorizing the sale of an approximately 2/10 of an acre property located on Walt Miller Street in the town of Mount Pleasant.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion to approve, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously.
Final reading, ordinance number 19008, an ordinance authorizing the sale of an approximately .2 acre portion of property located on Walt Miller Street, town of Mount Pleasant. Yes, sir.
Okay. This brings us to Council New Business, Section C, Executive Session. We would be going into executive session to receive legal and contractual information on A, consideration of an economic development incentive grant, B, legal advice related to the Board of Zoning Appeals decision in case A318 Earls Court, and C, legal advice related to the potential purchase of real property. The notice to the public is that council may take action on any item, including any subsection of any section, listed on an executive session agenda or discussed in an executive session during a properly noticed meeting. We would also be going in for item 2, personnel matters, consideration number A of application to the Historical Commission, B, applications to the Commercial Design Review Board, C, consideration of applications to the Culture, Arts, and Pride Commission, and D, consideration of applications for the Board of Zoning Appeals. All of these things, we may take action on any item, including any subsection of any section listed on an executive session agenda or discussed in an executive session during a properly noticed meeting. Is there a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
We have a motion, and we have a second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are in executive session.
If we all work together, we can get out of here in 2.5 hours.
I know, we might make it.
To be remembered. I want to be forgotten.
Resisting a giant plate of cookies and this bowl. I win tonight.
We have reconvened from executive session. No action was taken, no votes were taken. There may, however, be some motions to result from our deliberations and information received. Shall we?
Mr. Mayor, I have a motion.
Yes.
I make a motion that we grant the economic development grant as discussed in our executive session.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously.
Mr. Mayor, I have several nominations to make. First, for the Bose, I'd like to nominate Mr. Hopkins.
I'll second. We have a motion and a second.
This is item 2D.
This is item 2D. Is there any discussion? Are we allowed, we can vote in that order.
Yes, sir.
I didn't know if we were voting out of order. All in favor of the nomination of Mr. Hopkins to the Board of Zoning Appeals signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
All right, poll the. Or as Robert says, divide the assembly, please.
Mr. Brimmer.
No.
Mr. Brimmer votes no. Mr. Bustos.
Aye.
Mr. Bustos votes yes. Mr. Cunane.
No.
Mr. Cunane votes no. Ms. Landing.
No.
Ms. Landing votes no. Mr. O'Rourke is absent. Mr. Owens.
No.
Mr. Owens votes no. Mr. Santos.
Aye.
Mr. Santos votes yes. Ms. Whitley.
No.
Ms. Whitley votes no. Mayor Haney.
Aye.
Mayor Haney votes yes.
The nomination fails. Is there another nomination for Boza?
Well, let me go ahead.
I'll do it. I nominate Megan Finch Stevens.
We have a nomination for Mrs. Stevens for Boza.
Second.
And we have a second. Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
The motion passes by a vote of 7-1.
Okay. Can I'd like to make a motion to nominate 3 people for the Historical Commission: Antonio White, Deborah Sutherland, and Courtney Thies.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? For those watching at home, we have 3 vacancies and 3 applicants. All in favor of the motion to nominate these 3 individuals to the Historical Commission, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 8-0. Item 2C.
I'd like to make a motion to nominate the following people to the Culture, Arts, and Pride Commission: Catherine Whitaker, Frank Sontag, Bren Montero, and Ann McGahey.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor of the motion to nominate these individuals to the Cultural Arts and Pride Commission, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. There were no applicants for item 2B, Commercial Design Review Board. Is there any other business to come before this council? I believe we have concluded our agenda. We will stand adjourned.
Under 3 hours, 2.5 hours.
My wife came home.
Sure.
Design review board sounds pretty important. Wouldn't that be like, people come to you?
I don't know. That's what he was interested in. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looking dapper as usual.
But we drafted you for this.
Hey, it happened to me once.